Looking for all the latest tips, tricks, updates of what's going on in the recruiting industry, check out the Digital Recruiter Sunday night newsletter. I am not here to blow up your inbox. I don't have enough time to create an email every single day. I once a week send you impactful, a big thing that I've learned this week or realized from working with hundreds of recruiters, owning an agency myself. I'm in the trenches every day like you are, and I'm sharing everything that I'm seeing every Sunday, from content, from automation, from how to get better clients, how to find candidates quicker, how to grow your team, how to hire people, everything in between. The link is in the comments. Sign up today, or you can go to my LinkedIn profile, Clark Wilcox. It's the first link on my feature section. You can sign up there. It's all free. So you get all the tips, everything that you need, free in your inbox every Sunday night. Sign up today. All right. Today I am joined by Denise Chaffin, President, Top Source Talent, the host of the Talking TA podcast. She's got quite a career in the recruiting agency world. We've been creating a lot of content and has her own podcast. So we're going to dive into all things. You've been learning some automation, learning some AI. So we have a lot to talk about. We were just talking about EOR and staffing offline. So she's a wealth of knowledge. And we're excited I'm excited to have her on. So Denise, thanks for being here.
Hey, thank you so much, Clark. I really appreciate you asking me. And welcome to the podcasting world. I love your background. That is like so cool. Yes, I started podcasting. I guess it'll be 2 years in February, March timeframe. I'd have to go back and look at the exact month that we started. But I started recruiting in the late 80s, 1988. So I'm coming up on 37 years or something like that here pretty soon in this business. So I've seen a few I guess, changes in the industry. Over the years. But it's interesting, you and I had talked about how we're kind of going back to some of the traditional recruiting. I call it traditional. Maybe I shouldn't say the word traditional. Maybe I should just say we're going back to some of the recruiting methods that we used, 30 plus years ago. Because, hey, why not? Why reinvent the wheel if it's working,
Well, it works, right? I mean, that's the thing is like people fall in love with automation, or they get into recruiting because maybe they can automate or they can work from home and all that. Right? So I think the motives to get into recruiting really became more expansive or diverse, right? There's different reasons beyond just, for me, it was like, I need a full-time job. I need to do something. And I don't know, my sport management degree is not getting me where I wanted to go. And I don't want to work in sports anymore. Like, I'm not a doctor. I'm not an engineer. Like, what can I be? And then Aerotech kind of called me. But then I think for people maybe that got in the last couple of years, it's like, well, I have a family. And like my wife got into recruiting because she was a teacher. And we had our firstborn, a second one on the way. She's like, can I recruit? I'm like, yeah. Right. And so like there's different ways to come in. So I think people get different training because of that. Right. I think the old school is like there's kind of a set way, like you go make your calls. But now you could learn to recruit and never make a call. You could do a phone call. You could do Zoom. You could do automation. I don't like that could be how it goes. So I think it's so interesting the way people get into the recruiting nowadays.
I was recruited at a funeral. Honest to God.
What's
honest?
I was going to ask how you got into recruiting. So
I was working for the Arizona Republic. I was working in the classified ad section. We had I'd been working there for a while, and while I was really grateful to the Arizona Republic newspaper for employing me and giving me an opportunity, I felt pigeonholed, and so I was at a funeral. And I happened to run into somebody who said, "Hey, what are you doing?" I said, "I'm working in the paper, blah, blah, blah." Anyway, a couple of days later, he called me and he said, "Hey, I'm working for this recruitment company." And he said, "I'd be interested to find out if, you've thought about making a career switch." And he said, we kind of talked about it a little bit at Carl's funeral. He said, and I said, "Well, what are you talking about?"
Carl.
I had no idea what recruiting was. I thought he was talking about the military. A lot of people have made that error in judgment. But anyway, so I went and met with his boss, who I still work with to this day. He and I are still working on projects together. Yep, 30 some years later. And so, yeah, I went and interviewed, and that's how I got into it. I was actually just recruited at a funeral.
You know? That's pretty good. I mean, that's a new one. I get some good stories, but that's up there, right? That's kind of how it works in recruiting. You start talking about it, you're like not really sure what that person does, but I've heard a lot of stories where like I don't know what they do recruiting is, but they make good money. Like I wanted to learn more. I just figured, all right, I'll work there. Like they seem like they're doing all right for themselves, and like you kind of just gravitate towards maybe some stability there. To your point, like where are some areas where there's not going to be a ceiling, right? And in recruiting, like. There kind of isn't one. If you're a producer, right? It's kind of whatever you want to make of it. So it's kind of cool. What was that firm like? What did they specialize in? Something?
Yeah, actually,
like industry skill set.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah. I worked with years later. It was in 2010. I worked with a guy by the name of Ian McKenzie. I worked for him at Intel as a contract recruiter, and he made a comment. He said, I think the best recruiters start out as agency recruiters and then come on site to do contractor or in-house recruiting, as they called it. And so when I started in 88 working for, I think he called it TSS Consulting. That's what his business is called now. But anyway, John McDonald, kudos to you, John, for bringing me on, all these years ago. But anyhow, his company was supporting companies like Motorola back then. We had a lot of work with Motorola and IBM. And so those were the two companies they brought me on to support. So I jumped into tech right away. Also, Capgemini was another company I supported. And then also they had an account with a mining company because copper mining is really big here in Arizona. And there was a company called Phelps Dodge Corporation, which it's now called Freeport McMoran, I think is how they pronounce it. Still here in Arizona, copper mining is still an industry. But anyway, so those were the companies we supported. So I learned early on to work across the board. It didn't matter what industry. If a client needed our support, whether it was in mining or with what were we working on at the time with IBM? I don't even recall what the positions were. I know that they had just come up with Lotus Notes back then, and they were also Sun Microsystems was another one. They were coming out with Unix back. I mean, I know I'm really dating myself here, but these were some of the challenges. We were actually just doing cold calling into companies, and we would buy directories off of people as they were leaving companies so that we would add them to our little cache. And we just used directory phone books to call into companies to recruit people. We didn't have the internet.
I have not heard that one before. So someone leaving the company,
we would pay them about $300, anywhere between $150 and $300 to buy a directory from them, for them to steal a directory from their company and sell it to us.
Well, and so did you? I'm assuming you didn't know these people were leaving. You just called them and would talk to them and figure out, I already am starting another job. Or when you would place them, they would give the directory, or all the above.
Yeah, no, when we placed them, actually, as they were leaving their company, then we would, encourage them.
Yeah, you serve them first, and they help you out.
That's right.
Pay for their time. Well, that's good. I like that a lot. I guess
we had a whole room full of. It would look like a library. It was just full of directories, company directories.
Wow! And so you call in, you get the directories. I know, like when I was starting at Aerotech, they were telling me like it was fax machine was running overtime all the time, right? That's how you get the resumes and stuff like that. Like, is that probably maybe like the biggest thing that you've seen change? Is just like how much faster things can happen, like kind of like that beginning stuff?
No, Clark, it's a good question because honestly, the term high volume recruiting was not a term back then, right?
No, you couldn't.
No,
couldn't
I mean there wasn't. High volume for us was sending off probably more than 3 candidates a day to a client, but. Or maybe a week, depending on how successful you were that week. But no, a high volume recruiting didn't happen until much later when we started using job boards. And the first job board I recall using was Monster. I know, maybe Career Builder. I don't know, one of those two. And I thought it was great. The only problem with it was everybody else was using the same job boards. So you ran into a lot of duplication. The first ATS I used was called Resumix. So what happened was over time, we transitioned, I guess, if you would, from the whole agency side. Now your clients wanted you to start coming on site to work for them as contract recruiters. Yeah. So I did that with Motorola. So I went to go work for Motorola. I'm trying to think of what year it was. Was it 94 maybe? 90, somewhere in that time frame. Yeah. They had started at the time the Iridium program. And so I went to go work on site for them to help support the Iridium program. And so we were working with an ATS. It was the first time I'd ever worked with one called Resumix. And I thought it was the greatest thing ever because people were like sending their resumes into this applicant tracking.
It's like magic. Yeah.
It's like, what? I don't have to call people. Now I still was though, because by this time we had transitioned away from, because I was not working in the agency world anymore. Now I'm working for a company. And so now we're working with IEEE directory. And so people were listed by their accomplishments, by the, what do you call them? When you, I'm drawing a blank right now. When you actually go out and you, what am I looking for? When you get a patent. Thank you.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah.
Jeez, Denise, really? Okay. So anyway, so when people would get patents on things or they'd be working for companies and they'd be listed by their title, which company they're working for. So it was an IEEE directory. So we were using that for some of our recruiting. Referrals. Getting referrals from people was always the way that we did our recruiting. And I still, to this day, will tap into people's psyche to have them come up with names for me of people that they might refer for a particular job if they're not interested. I still use that old school type of recruiting because it works. It works.
It works. It works today. It works right now. Like we've been getting referrals and on stuff that's could be $30,000-$40,000 fee.
Yeah.
You get referrals to it. And it doesn't always have to be a huge fee, even if it's, $5-10K fee, right? It's still referral, just that time that you're saving. But also to your point, you talk about the traditional methods kind of coming back or being, really talked about more. Just doing a 360 call, right? How many candidates you talk to and just figure out, okay, if you're a contractor here, you've probably been a contractor elsewhere. Who hired you, right? Was that through an agency? Which agency, right? You start to kind of piece that together, because, newer recruiters think, or like my leads or my cold outreach, my cold email. I'm like, that's great, to have. And then they're like, well, I have my campaign running, but I have people asking me for a job versus needing help hiring. Right. I'm like, what's their title? What's the VP of operations? Is it the VP of sales? Did you book a call? No. Why not? Like wait, what are you doing? Well, they're looking for a job right now, right? But like, they might be hiring right now. You can, help them kind of navigate. Well, I don't have a job for them. Well, there's so many other ways you could help them. Maybe with the resume, their LinkedIn profile, right? Like how to network, like how to digitally network. People have questions all the time about that. Like, and then find out, how do they do the hiring? Are they in charge? Is it HR? Is it agency? Is it internal? And then, you take care of them. And then wherever they go next, like, you're probably going to be their first call, or you're going to make it easier. You could track, right, who jumps a job and updates their LinkedIn. You could follow up with that person. Like, you're reducing that friction. And I think that comes from the traditional way that like recruiters were taught to do.
Yes.
Right. And it's like bringing that back and just being, I think people almost like are too, I don't want to say greedy, but like they don't understand what they have in terms of automation and cold email, LinkedIn automation, all that stuff now compared to, when you started, even when I started. It's like, every call was gold.
Every call.
Like, how can you get the most out of every call?
If you could get somebody on the phone and keep them on the phone for more than 15 seconds, that was a successful call.
Yeah. And then it's like,
we were literally cold calling people. Like, right? So for a lot of these positions or cold calling into companies, that was the other thing. You had to call into a company in order to find those employees. I mean, their phone numbers weren't necessarily there. In the directories, or oftentimes you had to call into a switchboard. I mean, does anybody know what a switchboard is? I mean, because they actually have people answering the switchboards, and you'd have to ask. And sometimes you would actually have to say that you were somebody that you couldn't just say, hey, I'm a recruiter, right?
You really could say.
No.
What would you say? That's what I was going to ask.
And so what I had a pseudonym, and my pseudonym was Lisa Bradley. And so I would call in as though I was working for Blue Cross Blue Shield, for example, as an insurance. Hey, he's one of my clients. I need to get in touch with him or her. This is Lisa Bradley from such and then that person would get on the phone. I go, hey, I was just using that as a ruse to get you on the phone. My name is Denise Chaffin, and I'm with, this agent.
I love that. What was the reaction?
The reaction back then was kind of normal because people expected it. I mean, that was just how we did business, and that was just, it was kind of standard operating procedure. Some people would say, oh, I can't talk right now. I always loved this one. Hold on, let me close my door. When someone say, because people had offices back then, they weren't using the bullpen type of office environment that you see used more frequently now. I don't know. Are people going back into offices? I hear some companies are putting people back into offices, depending on their position, right?
Yeah, it depends what you are. I mean, I don't think, too many maintenance mechanics are going, working remote. No. But I think it depends. I know Nike was big on people coming back in because that's how you innovate. Right. Working together in groups and stuff like that. So I think it depends probably the industry and your skill set.
Well, plus people didn't have cell phones back then. I mean, cell phones didn't come around till the mid 90s. So, and they weren't that popular, and people weren't like leaving them on at work or, cell phones had a different place in society back then.
And purpose and everything. Yeah, absolutely.
So, or somebody would give you a cell phone number, and then they would go to their car at lunch and call you from their car.
Yes.
On their cell phone.
The car phone. My first car had a non-working car phone.
That's great.
Yeah. It was aesthetics only. So one of the things that
I love it.
I think from the earlier days, I would say early, but that's like the early days of like modern recruiting, from like what it developed into now.
Right.
Like and especially when we get people that have been in industry since maybe the 80s and 90s, is like you guys are used to pitching like 30% fees, like all that stuff. Did you see were you kind of always consistent there? Did you see when clients started to push back and be like, wait, this agency is doing it for 20 or 15%, all that? Because now that's when people don't realize there's so much more competition. Like the supply and demand, there's only so many recruiting agencies back then. Compared now, there's so many different options. Like, did you see that affect like your pricing? Was there a certain time when you have seen that? Like, I'm curious.
That's an interesting question, actually. I think that there's always been a lot of recruiting agencies, and it's always been very competitive. And fees were always, your retained search firms, of course, are always charging a lot more. And I've always said that retained search firms back then had a deeper black book, for contacts, and so they could justify their higher rates. Plus, I think that there was a lot of pomp and circumstance. There was a lot more rubble-elbing with the executives.
It's a branding thing. Yeah. A country club recruiting.
Right.
Yeah, I get you.
And executives liked being contacted and say that they were working with an executive recruiter. There was just a lot more status around retained search. Now, I think retained search is still a viable part of our industry, but I don't think it's as viable as it used to be because there is so much competition. And not only that, but what used to be their kind of exclusive database has now become the internet, and we all have access to it. We have access to the same people that they do. So they've kind of lost a little bit of street cred, if you will, over the years, because there's a lot of us who've been in this business a long time who can jump in there and do a job much quicker and faster without having to set up these executive meetings and whatnot. It's just a different landscape now than it used to be, right? But they still charge a lot more money because they have the big fancy offices. Those of us working from home can do the same exact work that they're doing, but charge 20% or 25% or whatever, where they're trying to still get 33 to 35%, and retain searches. And so a lot of companies say, no, we don't want to pay retainers. We want to do everything on contingency. So there's a lot of us, home-based offices and home-based recruiting service companies that are willing to work, at the lower rates on contingency and in competition to the retained search. So I think that they're probably a little more challenged these days than they used to be back when I started in the business. But I don't know. We'd have to ask them, really.
Yeah, well, I wonder if that will come back around to your point with some of the traditional things because there's so much information, so much spam. Everyone has access to the database that I almost feel like authenticity and relationship building and networking, not forced networking, but like true, having the black book, as you say, like that's almost kind of coming back in style. I feel like it's a kind of trending back there, and people are willing now of like, okay, now that everyone has access to the information and can hit up everyone who is doing things more strategically, more authentically, more of that relationship, people almost kind of want to go back to kind of keeping like a smaller corner. I mean, I just have exhaustion from all the stuff and noise out there, and I kind of go back to my 5 to 10 blogs that I read daily, or people like I kind of keep it a closer corner and almost okay to invest in that. And I wonder if that'll kind of come back around, this like phase of like everyone getting spammed, everyone's kind of burnt out a little bit. So it'll be interesting. I don't think it'll be, maybe the pricing will still have to affect, but I've seen like contingent recruiting has a higher fee. And then if you want to go retained, you get like 3 or 4 points, discount for going retained and being really more bought in and streamlined, because I don't think having 10, 20, 30 agencies is really working for that many companies.
Well, but the other piece of it too, though, is when you talk about going back to traditional, now you have to look at, okay, we can't go back to the same exact process that we did before. We can, like you're saying, though, we can incorporate some of those relationship practices that we had, and building relationships with people. And that's really, I think, what kind of did set apart the retained search part of our industry from contingency or contract recruiting, as we called it back then. Now we can even, dive into that a bit, because contract recruiting now has different titles
Way
and names.
But,
when you look at that relationship building that people did back then, that regardless of how you were recruiting, it was all about relationship building. And that's what we're going back to now, right? Yeah. More so than, and I say that because I think a lot of recruiting has become over the years very transactional. And as the internet was taking off and we were having more job boards, and LinkedIn jumped in there and became this, professional network platform, for all of us. And LinkedIn has been a great professional network platform for all of us. But that's where now all of a sudden you've got this rapid movement. You've got this, let's get, speed. It's all about the speed of the transaction, how quickly, time to fill, how quickly can we get these positions filled? And especially if you have, a hiring ramp for a big company, let's say, we've been working in the semiconductor industry for so many years. And so we've got now manufacturing, and you've got engineering and supply chain. You've got all these different areas that need to do this big, fast ramp. How quickly can we do this? And it's, the name of the game is speed, right? So
yes,
how can you build relationships when you're trying to just move the process so quickly and become so transactional? You lose the relationship connection with people when you are doing that. So I think that's part of what we're looking at going back to now, right?
Well, I think it's spot on. And I know you started your firm in 2013, started the podcast a couple of years ago. I'm going to infer a little bit here, but did you start with the marketing and the LinkedIn marketing, the podcast to kind of, because you have some of that speed, it's like, well, how can I get out in front of my market and get them to know me without having to call every single person individually? Right? Was that some of kind of was that some of the inspiration to get out market? Now you have, you post on LinkedIn, you have the podcast. Like, was that kind of what inspired you? Was, how can I get people to know me? And get to know our firm.
Well, it's interesting you bring that up, because 2 years ago, work was starting to kind of slow down a little bit in the semiconductor area. This is post-COVID. They had this big ramp of hiring, and everybody needed chips because everybody was moving home. All this remote work was going on, and people were building home offices. And now all of a sudden the electronics market was just like going crazy, trying to keep up with supply and demand. Or demand and supply, however you want to say it. And anyway, all of a sudden now that leveled off, and things just kind of, flattened out.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden now here you've got this like kind of like flat industry or industry that's getting flatter, and you're like going, all right, so what are we going to do now? Well, one of our clients at the time, I hope they're still a client. They haven't been hiring a whole lot lately. Is Intel. You know, they've been going through a little bit of a blip. But anyway, so they were, at the time, they had hired us to do what we called talent marketing. So I had someone on my team who was doing some talent marketing for them for one of their new business units. And so the guy that I had hired to do the talent marketing for Intel, now he, came to me and said, hey, why don't you think about doing this for Top Source Talent? Maybe starting a podcast just to kind of get yourself out there more, to diversify a little bit. And again, take advantage of the flattening of the market to rebrand yourself. I said, ooh, great idea. So that was the impetus really behind getting this started, was we're taking because we had just been running and gunning. You didn't even have time to even do any business development or get your name out there or try to reconnect with people that you've worked with in the past or connect with new clients. You didn't have time because you were so busy. So I've always said, when things are a little bit flatter and things are slower, that is when we have a chance then to look at, okay, what is our customer base? Who are we going to target? Who do we want to contact? How do we want to take our own talent acquisition marketing forward in our own company branding, right? The really cool thing about podcasting too, and you probably know this as well, is when you are podcasting, you can actually take time then to bring other people in from other areas of the talent acquisition industry that you wouldn't normally work with, right? I mean, some of the people that I have interviewed on my podcast, I would never have thought about working with them. And I'll give you an example. Holland America Princess, the cruise line people. I had a podcast with Jim D'Amico and Taylor Franco, and it's on our library. And it was an amazing podcast because I learned all about hiring for temporary workers, people who are going to come in and work for just so many months out of the year. And how do you hire for that? How do you hire for temporary workers, who are going to be working on ships, you know what I mean? Or supporting ship, Carnival cruises.
What do the burdens look like for that? And, everything else. It's a whole thing.
It's a different market, a whole different market. Yep. And then they taught me all about, there is a new type of recruiting out there called IP targeting. Have you heard of that one?
IP targeting.
IP targeting.
I don't think I have.
Okay,
no.
So you have to watch then the podcast on it because they talk all about IP targeting. So I wound up contacting the IP targeting company called El Toro, and I interviewed them. Now all of this just kind of like is one lead after another and takes you down all these different paths, right?
Yeah.
So the one thing that podcasting has done for me in my career that I didn't expect it to is it opened up doors and windows to this industry that I didn't even know existed. I mean, I had no idea all the different potential clients that I could meet or other parts of the industry that I hadn't even considered. And I think I talk about them because they were such a one-off type of company. And I met them at TalentNet Live. Thank you to Craig. What's Craig's last name for TalentNet Live? I just saw his name on a few minutes ago pop up. Anyway, it's in Grapevine, Texas. And I had gone to their conference last year and met these people and then, brought them back with me and did an interview. And then the other one was Football Club Dallas. Interviewed them about how to hire people for sports, sports recruiting. I mean, so all these different things come up and you have the opportunity then to listen to people. Yeah. And what they have to offer our industry and what their world is like in our industry. Because if you think about talent acquisition touches every single industry out there. Every company. Yeah. Every company. Yeah. So when people say, well, don't you run out of things to talk about? No, you don't.
Never. I mean, even this is a perfect example, right? Like Christina works with me. messaged you, got us. He sent you my calendar. We both hopped on and we're like, we did like the Spider-Man meme. We're like pointing at each other, like, wait, who are you? Like, who are you? Like, you podcast? I podcast, right? And then we started talking. Like, yeah, I've seen this and I've seen that. Right? There's so many commonalities. But it's completely our own journey. I mean, IP recruit. I had never heard of that until 3 minutes ago.
Yeah.
And there's so many things. And you mentioned FC Dallas and sports recruiting. I'm like, well, I worked in sports. I can tell you the first thing they do in sports recruiting is there's no salary on the job description because they don't pay you anything.
No.
At least when you're starting out, right? But I'm sure the corporate is way different, right? If you're recruiting executives to, the interns. So I'm just like, it's kind of getting my brain going too, which is, again, things that you don't consider until they kind of pop into your lane. But I think the point that I'm hearing, because I've experienced this myself, is I don't feel like I'm ever chasing anymore.
No.
Like, I feel like I'm just always kind of talking to people I'm meant to be talking to, and I'm always like learning, but it just comes from creating that initial momentum of like what you did. It's like, I'm just going to press record and just put stuff out there and see what happens. Right. And in doing that, like, people kind of latch on, like, and not in a bad way, like in a good way. Yeah. Just like, like, how about this? And you should talk about this and you should interview with that person. And I think I have an email to get back to you from right before this started of like another introduction of like, hey, you should speak at this event. I'm like, okay, like, sounds good. I think it sounds like people got to hear what you're about, but also the vehicle of like other interesting stories. It's like that curiosity and that listening is always going to be two of the best things you could ever do in sales and business development. It's like, we're just like, stop worrying about the tech so much of just like, what are the principles to kind of draw people out a little bit and kind of get them going and listen to your point and hear like, oh, wow, you're doing some really cool things here. Have you thought about this? And they're like, no, I haven't. Right. And that might be some of the business opportunities. So I don't know if that's kind of how you experience potentially getting clients from the podcast interview.
Yeah. And you do. And it's interesting because one of the things that happened later, oh, by the way, it was Craig Fisher. Sorry, Craig, that I didn't catch your name.
We apologize.
Yeah, we apologize, Craig. Yeah. Craig Fisher. Anyway, he has a really great, Talent Net Live is a really great little conference to go to in Texas. And I met some amazing people there. And it kind of started me really on this path, if you would, to meeting more people and to attending more conferences. So that's another thing that came up. I went to, from Talent Net Live last November, I went to Transform in March, I think it was, in Las Vegas. And what I did there is I took my podcast producer, and we just interviewed a bunch of people. And it was just kind of willy-nilly. I didn't have I had no like game plan. We took our microphone and
just went for
it, right? And in fact, my producer, Heath, he's like, what do you got? I mean, you have nobody lined up? I go, no, we're just going to do this. But I did learn.
Love it.
I did learn, though. I probably really kind of should set up some, interviews. I mean, it went really well. Interviewed some great people. Had the opportunity to meet some Gen Z people. We did a Gen Z podcast that was really good. I love those people. I know that they kind of get a bad rap, but you know what? They are our future. We need to listen to them.
Every young generation gets a bad rap. 10 years ago, it was millennials, and I'm like, well, what did I do? I just graduated. Why are you yelling at me? And now I'm yelling at them. So it's all the circle of life.
I know. It is. But anyway, so I went to these conferences. I started out with Transform, then we went to Unleash, and I did set up interviews with people at Unleash. And then just really recently we went to RecFest. And so that was in Nashville. So it's been fun. I've had an amazing, it's been amazing to meet all the people I've met, because what I've tried to do is line up anywhere between 12 and 18 people per conference. And so then you get to meet those people, you get to learn their business. And, what I've learned to do at the conferences is to ask the same questions of everybody. And I keep it small, keep it simple, ask 3 questions. What brought you to the conference? What do you expect to gain from the conference? And what do you think the future of our industry looks like, especially right now with AI taking off? So that's been an interesting dynamic. People have some great feedback around it. Everyone I have spoken to has the same overarching idea about AI in our industry. We need to learn it. We need to stay in contact and and we need to train ourselves as this technology evolves. Even if we are going to go back to using some of the principles, recruiting principles that we used in the late 80s and early 90s, for relationship building and that type of thing, AI is going to be there to help us. We're probably going to move away maybe from some of the technology that we were using in the 90s. Maybe some of the job boards aren't going to be as relevant to us because AI is going to present us with some different tools. And so we need to embrace those. We embraced the job boards when they came out. So why not embrace AI? And as I was telling you at the beginning, I really like Copilot. I like Gemini. I haven't really embraced ChatGPT as much. But the other ones are free. Probably that's why I'm using the others. But I do like the content, like you and I were talking about, the content, the ideas, that AI is helping me with when I need to do posts, when I'm looking at some ideas for podcasting, because AI brings some ideas to me that I can go, yeah, I can use that to build some content. I think it's helping me to expand my own creativity a little more. I think it's going to help me to be more efficient. I think it's already helping me to be more efficient. So and you're probably finding the same thing, right?
Efficiency is great. I mean, it's just, I think from creating submittal packages or helping write emails, where it's just like I free form my thoughts into it, and then it just helps me come up with something based on my words. It's like a little bit more formalized, and that maybe reduces the mental energy that I have to spend on something like that or something else. So it kind of like makes me more efficient there. I was telling you, we created like a digital recruiter chat GPT because you can create different ones. So we have ones for, creating messaging, creating content. So I'll interview someone or a client for an hour. We'll take that transcript, all their own words, we'll section them all, and then we'll have AI help us just from its feeding. We fed my own posts and all my content, my formatting style and everything that we know works on LinkedIn to generate leads. And then we create 15, 20 posts for a client, for that month. And it's all their words. It's just helping us like organize it and all that just way faster than one person could do it. And then I go in and I make the final edits, right? So it all sounds coherent. So it's like taking someone's voice, AI kind of truncates the editing process for us, and then I do like the final review. So it's it's just fantastic for stuff like that. And I think it kind of reimagines what business could look like and what your day-to-day could look like, and it changes the revenue opportunities potentially for a business. So I think it's almost like you experiment with it and you're like, wait a minute, it's out here overwhelmed with what you could do with it. Then you have to get back. And then what you and I are talking about, like, how do you be productive with AI, productive and effective still with AI, and leverage it versus just be like, oh, this is a cheat code that can do everything for me. It's like, no, like you still got to, we say you can't outsource your thinking, right? You still got to be like active.
That is so good.
Yeah.
Outsource my own thinking. Yeah. Yeah. Because then you'll quit thinking. Because it's outsourced, right?
And that's when you get in trouble, right? I mean, candidates, right? Clients are like, all right, like, am I talking to a robot? And I think you're right. Like those leaders, and you're saying like, use AI to leverage. How can you get to not lose the human connection,
right?
In a sense, right? And I think I tell people like, look at it as like a filtering system. Like automation and AI is there to help like your top of funnel, like filter the people, because to your point, what you just said, there's so much out there. That like, I've talked to people that have been in the industry 30 years, like yourself, and it's just like, there's always something new. There's always a new company you didn't hear about, or this or that. It's like, it never ends, which is great. That means there's a ton of opportunity or potential opportunity, but it's like, use it to kind of filter down, like to kind of find your people, find your tribe, right, within your market of like, that's what I built this business off of. It's just like I used automation and I found my clients and I found my network and my partners that I didn't know 4 years ago.
Yeah.
But automation gave them the opportunity to connect with me, and my content gave them the opportunity to maybe get to know me a little bit better. It sounds like you're kind of doing the same thing. And I think if people do that, it can be really effective.
It's interesting too, you bring that up, Clark, because one of the things that came up at RecFest, was it Amy Cropper? I like to give people credit who have, it's in our library, our podcast library for RecFest. Yeah. Anyway, she brought up the fact that, using some of the new AI tools, shouldn't be so daunting, especially if you start out small. She made a funny comment. She said, you don't have to chase the brightest shiny object that's out there, right? Start out small. Start out using some of the AI tools that might be a little less expensive, right? See what's going to work. Start there and see what's going to work for your company. Whether you're an agency or you're corporate America, whatever the case may be, start using some of the smaller tools or the simpler tools that aren't so elaborate and so costly, and then build from there, because it gives you an opportunity. I have been test driving a lot of software. One of the things about going to the conference is you meet a lot of people and they want you to test drive their software so that you can give them feedback and so that maybe they can sell it to you, right? Especially, some of the sourcing software. There's so much sourcing software out there. I'll be curious over the next 3 to 5 years, which sourcing software really takes off and serves us. I know that Seek Out is still out there, and Hire Easy are some of the, I think 2 of the older software platforms now, right, for sourcing. But there's so much. I mean, I tried. Is it called RecruitBot? RecruitBot was one. Hirefly was another one. And not only that, and they're good. There was a couple little suggestions I made to each company on how they could, power up a little more. There was another one I tried called Better Leap. I haven't heard from them since trying their platform. There were a couple platforms I tried also for note-taking software. And I think there's some improvements that need to happen there, because even though I liked the notes that came from, I guess, you can add this note-taking software to your Zoom meetings or your phone interviews. And it's nice because it gives you this transcript afterwards, and you can kind of pull some of the data from that transcript and add it into your notes. But the note-taking software is supposed to help you to just move those notes right directly to the hiring manager. And that has not happened for me. I have to still go in and edit.
You still want to step in, right?
Yeah.
That's what I see. It's almost like I kind of like capturing, either I just have the call recorded and then I transcribe it through like Loom. I can record on Loom and that transcribes right away, and that's been great. Or, if we have Zoom, that has it as well. And like we enter that in the system, but almost like my own note taking and then putting that into the basic ChatGPT AI or a Gemini, has been more effective than buying a software that's trying to streamline a lot of that stuff. And I'm sure there's something out there that's great, but there is a balance between the tool and the manual work.
Right.
And I think that's why I love your point of starting lean, start small, see what you gravitate towards, see what you pick up. And sometimes you might realize it's going to take you a little bit and maybe have some more patience, but don't get too sidetracked that you stop producing revenue generating activities.
Right.
But find time to incorporate that and get to a little bit, and you're gonna get there. And maybe you do a training on something, or whether it's Clay or ChatGPT or an automation or something like that. Definitely do stuff like that, right? That continuous improvement's important, but also don't put so much pressure on yourself to do all the tools at once.
Oh, exactly.
As well, and that people get overwhelmed. And I talk about telling people you got to cancel your debit card because you signed up for 30 tools and you don't know what they are anymore. So you stop getting charged. I'm not going to say that's me, but it has time maybe.
No, but you don't want that.
But it happens, right? Oh, I signed up for this trial and that trial, and I don't even use it anymore. I have my 2 or 3. So it's just it's iterative. It's an iterative process.
Well, and I think it's important too to look at where is it you need to save time. Where is your time going to be best used moving forward, and what efficiencies do you want for your time? Note taking, I think, is a great idea. Using Loom or using a note taking software is a great idea, because honestly, I think as recruiters, when we are doing phone interviews or Zoom interviews, or I should say video conferencing interviews, since Zoom is one platform, I think that the note-taking aspect of it is probably one of the most time-consuming jobs that we have. Having to go back and look at our notes. Oh my gosh, I use a book like this, right, to take my notes, and then I have to go back afterwards and look at my notes and type up my notes. I'm still doing that, but that is a huge time, consumption effort, if you would, on my part, to have to go and then take the notes and then transcribe them back into some sort of a readable format for my hiring manager or the hiring
while
team.
You're still paying attention to the person on the other line, right? And doing all that. And I think that's where it can really help. And to your point, is if you don't have to worry about the notes, or at least it's recorded, the information is being captured, you can focus more on the person on the other side. That's really impactful.
But
as well, maybe you get more. Well, then you get more buy-in if you're not worried about your notes. You just get more buy-in with the candidate or the client on the other side, and then you're able to kind of have that conversation, not worried that you're going to miss something or forget something.
But my suggestion though to companies who are going to create that note-taking software, whether it is Loom or it's Hire Logic or Bright Hire, all of these companies have great tools, but they're trying to make them too fancy. Do something simple. Simple is better. And again, I go back to what I learned at RecFest. We don't need a lot of bling for this kind of thing. We just need simple note-taking, something we can just do a copy and paste into a document that we want to create ourselves for our hiring teams. For example, I think some of the note-taking software right now is too binary. It's using they and their and them instead of he and she, however you want to do it. I mean, if I'm talking to a candidate and I am submitting that candidate to a hiring manager, I am going to refer to that candidate by name in my notes. Yep. And I'm going to say he or she or they, if that's what they want, whatever the candidate prefers. But I am going to refer to that candidate by name off and on through those notes, because that I don't like. I'm just one of those recruiters. I don't like using just binary language when I'm sending notes about a candidate. That's just not who I am as a person. So I want to be able to capture my notes, but also be able to create my own, dialogue with that hiring team. So I think simple is better for me and more efficient. I think that some of the note-taking software is geared more towards the enterprise level companies, which is okay because, you can include videos and clips of videos and things like that. That's all well and good for bigger companies. But if you want to target everybody, you've got to have some note-taking software, maybe where we can pick and choose what part of your software we are capturing or that we're going to use for our note-taking,
I think people want that creativity that's simple. They can figure out how to seamlessly fit into their workflow. And that's a big thing that I always talk about with my client with coaching and training is I'm looking to reverse engineer something that that your team's going to use. Not just get and never use again. And there's a lot to be said for that. Now, I'm not an engineer. I don't do all that stuff or coding or whatever. I'm a developer, so I can't speak to how easy or not easy that stuff is. But I think some of the best softwares are built by people that were in recruiting or have been recruiters, because they can start to think like recruiters and understand kind of the workflow and how this fits into what the goal is, especially for agency, which is you got to make placements, you got to produce. So, and I think it's a great point.
Well, and I think but I just think, right now, for AI tools, I think note-taking software for me personally is probably one of the most time efficient and time saving tools that I can use. Sourcing, I think the longer that we are in this business, we will, adapt what works best for us for sourcing, whether it is referrals or whether we're going to use, LinkedIn or other platforms, for sourcing. I mean, that's all well and good. But, the other thing that comes out of that too is as we are developing relationships with candidates, like you had mentioned, following those candidates to other positions and watching them advance their careers, and they become now clients or the other business associates for, on many different levels, right? But that relationship building, I think, is still the number one tool.
It always comes back down to it.
That will follow us regardless of what tools we're using or what technology allows us. We still have to develop and maintain those relationships with people, because this is a relationship business. This is a human-oriented business that we're in. And that is another thing too, Clark, that has come up at every conference, all of my podcasts. It just is repeated over and over again. We are in a people-oriented business.
Yeah, you can't lose sight of that fact. And everything else is supposed to complement that piece of it, not take it over.
That's right. And it will.
What? Yeah,
and I think it will.
And I think the good and the great recruiters and agencies, like you, that's what they're doing.
Yeah.
They're trying to figure out that balance, and it's never, not looking for perfection, but what's that balance? What's that harmony with all that? And it's just you kind of go from there. The easy apply, the ATS AI scraper. You're gonna hear all that stuff, but there's also like the good potential on pieces, on that stuff too. So
no, I love it though too. Yeah, the easy apply. I love the easy apply. That is like so cool. And there are
until you get 200 candidates that aren't a fit, that you got to review and spend time on.
And then now let's talk about a resume screening software. Oh my God, that's a whole different conversation right there.
A whole different, yeah. So again, it's always a double-edged sword.
It is.
And I think that's going to be the interesting battle. I mean, I guess what do you see as the main thing kind of in the future? If you have like one piece of advice for like a recruiter, maybe getting started, or maybe someone that's kind of a little stuck, in their desk, and what's one piece of advice you'd give them right now?
Okay, and I'm going back, to what you were talking about earlier. I started out in the agency world, right, and then I transitioned into corporate recruiting. And I think having had the opportunity to work in both camps has been probably the most, what do I want to say? The most productive, or maybe not productive. That's not the right word. Career expanding. That has expanded my career more. Having that opportunity to work in both camps, because you have an appreciation. I love, and I'm going to go back to what Ian McKenzie said. People who start out as agency recruiters and then move into either in-house or corporate roles, whether you're going to be a contract recruiter or an RPO recruiter. We didn't even talk about RPO. Our RPO recruiter or full-time in-house, whatever the case may be. When you start out in the agency world, you have this sense of urgency because, again, you're making placements. Your income is based on the placements that you make, right?
Yeah.
Because you're working commission. Now you move from agency into corporate, but you come in with that sense of urgency. If you haven't worked in the agency world, you don't understand that sense of urgency in the same capacity. So I think that for all recruiters, if you really want to embrace this industry, work in both areas. Do some work in agency and also do some in-house corporate recruiting, where you can, because that is really going to help to expand your career. It's going to help to guide you on what area of this industry you want to work in. And then other people too have gone into HR work, or maybe they've gone from HR into talent acquisition. There's a lot of parallels and transitions that happen in this industry. I had one recruiter who worked for me, and she was supporting IT people, and her name is Teresa. And Teresa was supporting, I think it was called Sunbank or something like that in Florida. And she had moved back there, and so she was working as a recruiter for their IT department. And all of a sudden, she found that she loved IT. And then she left recruiting altogether and went strictly into IT, went back to school and became an IT specialist.
I mean,
there you go.
That's it. It's great. I think I know I'm going to have to spend a few months doing corporate recruiting or something. I've only done some consulting for some firms, but I think it is a blend. And I've seen people with both that experience. I think be able to think through kind of the role more a little bit, because you have respect and appreciation for the other side and what they're going through a little bit more. So to your point, career expanding, or it can make you a little bit more dynamic. And I think it's great if people get that opportunity to make that happen, because the urgency of agency recruiting, that's something that has never left.
Right.
It's kind of been ingrained in me. It is probably the biggest difference I see.
Yeah.
The people that don't come from that background of like, you got to capitalize on this now. Like this is, we can't sit around and wait. We can't not qualify this role properly or not push back on clients. Like we got families to feed.
Right.
So that's ingrained. And if we didn't do that, I would get called out, my AirTech office, twice a day we met as a team. Like if you didn't have, your ducks in a row, you get called out.
Sure.
So that's kind of that fear that PTSD is kind of still runs.
PTSD.
Well, this is, I feel like we could talk for probably 3 to 4 hours. There's about 6 topics that I had in my notes that we didn't even touch or talk on.
Yeah.
So that's good.
Well, you're going to be on my show. You're going to be my guest here in the next couple of weeks. So we can talk more. Maybe we can expand more on contract recruiting, RPO recruiting, that type of thing, because that's a whole different,
different ball.
It really is. Yeah. It really is.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's so much you can talk about. Like we were, discussing earlier.
It's so easy. Yeah. I mean, especially when you have such a cool background. I think the things that you're doing now, I think just you're blending everything together. And I think that's really cool. It's really inspiring that you're not just stuck like, oh, this is the way I was taught. I got to stay this way. So like embracing, marketing podcasts, but also getting back out into networking. I love that you're doing that, and I love that this conversation and getting to know people like you, I think is great. And to your point, these conversations of like just be productive, just create, put yourself out there. Don't be afraid to call, the email, the content. Like there's time in the day to do everything.
That's right.
At some point, not all on the same day, but over time, right? And just bit by bit. So I appreciate you coming on and just sharing.
Of course. Oh, Clark. Yeah, it was fun. Yeah, Clark. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me. And we'll see you in a couple weeks.
Welcome. Huh? I'll be on Talking TA. We'll have the link to Talking TA in the episode summary. So, when you give it 5 stars and all that love, check that out. Subscribe there. I'll be on there in a couple weeks. This will probably come out around the same time that we will record.
Sure.
So that'll be fun. Yeah. And then, follow Denise on LinkedIn, connect. Yeah. And